An elderly father, Don Mateo, is treated as a burden by his daughter-in-law inside the house he helped build. With years of hard work, she forces him to eat separately, makes him clean in silence, speaks to him with contempt, and humiliates him in front of strangers as if he were worth nothing. How much must someone endure who only deserves respect? Tell us where you're watching from. Give a like if this story touches you, and subscribe for more. In a spacious home in Polanco, Mexico City, the kitchen breathes steam and the sharp smell of chlorine. The refrigerator's hum competes with the sizzle of a pan and the monotonous drip of a faucet that won't quite close. On the marble countertop, gleaming plates and fine crystal glasses wait for guests. In the corner, a bucket of lukewarm water and rubber gloves await Don Mateo, 74 years old, trembling slightly in the cold air from the climate control system. His hands, marked with sunspots and old scars, grip a damp rag as he runs a sponge over tiles that already shine. Valeria enters, his daughter-in-law, impeccable in her presentation. She wears a cream-colored dress, heels that echo against the floor, expensive perfume that leaves a trail of gardenias in her wake. She lifts her chin slightly when she sees him. With 2 fingers, as if avoiding contamination, she points to an invisible splash. "What's the point of you being here if you can't even clean properly?" she says, not bothering to lower her voice. A housekeeper shrinks back. No one responds. Don Mateo looks for a chair, but Valeria pushes it away with a subtle gesture. "Stand until you're finished." Outside, elegant laughter drifts from the living room. Inside, the towel drips in silence. He glances at the wooden rosary peeking from his shirt pocket, breathes deeply, and says nothing. When Valeria leaves, a thick silence remains, heavy as smoke. In that silence, something cracks, and at the same time, a quiet indignation ignites like an ember beneath ash. The old man's fingers work methodically across the tiles, even though they gleam already. His knees ache from standing too long. Through the archway, he can hear conversations about business deals and vacation homes in Tulum. Someone mentions a new restaurant in Roma Norte. A woman laughs, the sound bright and carefree. Don Mateo wipes down the same spot 3 times, knowing Valeria will inspect his work with the precision of someone searching for failure. The bucket water has gone cold. Small bubbles of detergent float on the surface, catching the overhead light. His reflection wavers there, distorted and old. He thinks of Rosa, his wife, who would have never allowed this. She died 3 years ago, taking with her the warmth that once filled their small apartment in Doctores. Now, he lives in this grand house in one of Mexico City's finest neighborhoods. And yet, he feels smaller than he ever did in their tiny home, with its cracked walls and leaking ceiling. A door slams, somewhere in the house. Footsteps approach. Don Mateo straightens, feeling the vertebrae in his spine protest. It's Anna, the young housekeeper, her eyes red-rimmed. She doesn't speak, but she places a hand briefly on his shoulder as she passes to retrieve something from the refrigerator. The gesture is small, almost nothing, but it steadies him. The evening light through the kitchen window turns golden, then amber. Shadows lengthen across the floor. Don Mateo's shadow stretches long and thin, like something being pulled apart. He rinses the sponge under running water, wrings it out, the sound loud in the quiet. His wedding ring catches the light. A simple band of silver, worn smooth by decades. In his pocket, the rosary presses against his chest. Rosa gave it to him on their wedding day, bought from a vendor outside the basilica. The wood is dark and polished from years of prayers. Sometimes, when his fingers find the beads, he can almost hear her voice praying the Ave Maria, her accent thick with the sounds of their mountain village in Oaxaca. Valeria appears again, this time with 2 friends, both dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than Don Mateo earned in a month during his working years. They speak in English, switching to Spanish only to order him to bring more ice, to adjust the air conditioning, to move this or that. He becomes invisible except when they need something. The friends don't look at him directly, as if acknowledging his presence would be uncomfortable. One of them drops a napkin. It flutters to the floor like a wounded bird. She glances at it, then at Valeria, who nods toward Don Mateo. "Could you?" she says, not a question. He bends slowly, his back complaining, and retrieves the napkin. When he straightens, the room tilts slightly. He grips the counter until the dizziness passes. "Are you finished with the tiles?" Valeria asks, her tone implying he should have been done an hour ago. He nods. Then start on the dishes from this afternoon. The party is at 7, and everything must be perfect. She pronounces the word perfect with extra emphasis, as if explaining a concept to a child. The sink fills with water. Steam rises, carrying the scent of lemon dish soap. Don Mateo's hands disappear into the suds. The water is too hot, but he doesn't adjust the temperature. Perhaps the heat can wash away more than just food residue. Perhaps it can burn away the feeling of being reduced to this, of being a burden in his own son's house. Through the window above the sink, he can see a jacaranda tree in full bloom, its purple flowers creating a canopy of color. A bird lands on a branch, preens its feathers, then flies away. Don Mateo watches it go, envying its freedom. The rosary in his pocket feels heavier than it should, as if absorbing all the prayers he cannot speak aloud. Don Mateo was born in the mountains of Oaxaca, son of a seamstress and a farmer. He learned to walk among hills and to tell time by shadows. As a young man, he migrated to the capital to carry sacks at La Merced Market, to mix cement as a construction worker, and when work was scarce, to sell tamales at dawn with a pot that seemed bigger than he was. He met Rosa at an atole stand. With her, he learned to save coins in a cookie tin and to iron shirts so their little Sebastian could arrive at elementary school with dignity. Rosa left early, but she left 2 inheritances. The first was a sepia photograph Don Mateo keeps folded inside a medallion. The second was the wooden rosary that has counted more goodbyes than our fathers. The medallion and the rosary live in his shirt pocket like 2 lighthouses. In its beads, he caresses voices from the past. Those early years in Mexico City were hard but honest. Don Mateo remembers carrying 100-pound sacks of flour up narrow stairs, his shoulders aching by midday. He remembers the smell of wet cement, gritty under his fingernails no matter how hard he scrubbed. He remembers winter mornings, when the cold bit through his jacket, standing at the corner of AJ Central, selling tamales to bus drivers and market vendors. The steam from his pot, the only warmth available. Rosa worked alongside him always. She took in sewing, her fingers moving with the speed of someone who had learned the trade from childhood. She made school uniforms for neighborhood children, repaired torn trousers, hemmed dresses for weddings and quinceañeras. Their apartment had 1 room and a tiny kitchen where they all slept, cooked, and lived. But Rosa kept it spotless. She scrubbed the floors every Saturday, hung white curtains she had sewn herself, and always placed fresh flowers in a chipped vase on the windowsill. Sebastian was their miracle, their reason for everything. Don Mateo remembers holding his son for the first time, this tiny creature with Rosa's eyes and his own dark hair. He promised then, in the sterile hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and new life, that his son would have opportunities he never had. He worked double shifts. He learned to read better so he could help with homework. When Sebastian showed an aptitude for mathematics, Don Mateo saved every extra peso for tutoring. The boy was bright, exceptionally so. Teachers noticed. They encouraged the family to keep him in school, to push him toward university. Rosa made sure he never missed a day, walking him to school herself even when she was tired from working late the night before. Don Mateo took on extra jobs, mixing cement by day and washing dishes in a restaurant by night, sleeping 4 hours if he was lucky. Sebastian earned a scholarship to UNAM, the National Autonomous University of Mexico. The day he received the acceptance letter, Rosa cried. Don Mateo held the paper in his cement-stained hands and felt something shift inside him, a boulder of worry rolling away to reveal solid ground beneath. Their son would not break his back carrying loads. Their son would use his mind. Rosa lived long enough to see Sebastian graduate, to see him land his first job at a tech startup, to see him wearing a suit and tie instead of work boots. Then cancer took her, fast and merciless, 6 months from diagnosis to death. Don Mateo held her hand in the hospital, the machines beeping steadily, marking time like a metronome. She made him promise to stay close to Sebastian, to let their son take care of him. "You gave him everything," she whispered, her voice thin as paper. "Let him give back." After Rosa died, the apartment felt cavernous, despite its small size. Every corner held memories. The kitchen where she taught Sebastian to make mole, the window where she sat sewing, natural light illuminating her work, the bed where they had slept together for 45 years. Don Mateo couldn't stay there. The silence was too loud. Sebastian insisted his father move in with him. By then, Sebastian had married Valeria, a woman from a wealthy family in Polanco. They had a son, Iker. They lived in a house with more rooms than Don Mateo had ever imagined a home could have. "You'll be comfortable, Papa," Sebastian said. "You'll have your own space. You won't want for anything." In the building where Don Mateo still keeps his old apartment, the neighbors remember him. Doña Tomasa on the third floor brings him elote bread when she can, wrapping it carefully in foil. She knows he visits once a week, checking that everything is in order, that the pipes haven't burst. Don Chuy, the building's doorman, greets him with old-fashioned respect, taking off his cap and calling him Don Mateo, with genuine warmth. These people knew Rosa, they came to her funeral, they understand loss. Sebastian is a good son, Don Mateo tells himself. He runs a technology firm in Santa Fe, employs dozens of people, travels internationally for business. He swears his father will never know need again. Don Mateo believes him. He loves his son with the kind of faith that doesn't require proof. Even when Valeria frowns at his presence, he thinks life, capricious but just, can still turn around. The rosary, warm in his hand, pulses like a promise kept. The following days become a carousel of small violences. They serve Don Mateo his food cold or oversalted, because he can't distinguish flavors anyway. They make him wash dishes after noisy dinners, standing until his hands burn and the water, mixed with industrial degreaser, opens cracks in his skin that bleed. The bathroom scale tells a bitter truth he's been trying to ignore. He's lost 11 pounds in a month. His trousers hang from his belt as if they belong to someone else. Valeria threatens an assisted living facility in Tlalpan, where they'll actually know how to care for him properly. Sebastian, absorbed in business deals and international travel, doesn't see what's happening. When he asks, Valeria smiles with practiced social grace. Of course we're taking care of him. Don Mateo doesn't tell his son the truth. He fears becoming a burden. At night, the hallway clock marks cold hours that refuse to pass. The mornings start earlier now. Valeria wakes him at 5:30 to prepare coffee for when she does yoga. The machine is complicated, all chrome and digital displays, nothing like the simple pot he used on a gas stove for decades. He stands in the kitchen while the house sleeps, figuring out buttons and settings, afraid of making a mistake. The coffee must be perfect, not too strong, not too weak. The exact temperature Valeria prefers. His room, which Sebastian proudly showed him when he first moved in, calling it "your space, Papa," has become more prison than sanctuary. It's at the far end of the house, past the laundry room. The door sticks. The window looks out onto a brick wall. Valeria gives him a list each morning, written in her precise handwriting on expensive stationery. Clean the guest bathroom, polish the silverware, organize the pantry, wipe down the baseboards in the living room. Tasks that take hours, that leave his back screaming and his knees swollen. Anna, the housekeeper, tries to help when Valeria isn't looking. She'll start a task Don Mateo has been struggling with, finishing it quickly with the efficiency of someone half his age. But Valeria has eyes everywhere. Once, she caught Anna cleaning windows that were supposed to be Don Mateo's responsibility. She docked Anna's pay and gave Don Mateo twice the work the next day. After that, Anna can only offer sympathy and quick glances, and the occasional glass of water left where he'll find it. The dinner parties are the worst. Valeria hosts frequently, inviting friends from her social circle, lawyers, doctors, business owners, women in designer dresses, men in tailored suits. They drink wine that costs more than Don Mateo's monthly income from his small pension. They talk about vacations in Europe, about art galleries and theater premieres, and they watch with barely concealed discomfort as an old man in worn clothes clears their plates and refills their glasses. One evening, a guest asks who he is. "My father-in-law," Valeria says, her tone suggesting she's explaining an unfortunate family obligation. "He lives with us." The guest nods, uncertain how to respond. Don Mateo, standing near the kitchen door with a tray of empty glasses, feels heat rise to his face. Not anger, something worse, shame. Iker, the 9-year-old grandson, sometimes finds him. The boy has his father's kind eyes and his mother's dark hair. He'll sit with Don Mateo in the kitchen, asking about the old days, about when Sebastian was young. Don Mateo tells stories carefully edited, leaving out the hunger and the exhaustion, highlighting the good moments. The time they went to Chapultepec Park and Sebastian rode the carousel 12 times. The time they saved enough to buy a television and watch the World Cup together. Iker listens, fascinated by this grandfather he barely knows. But Valeria doesn't like them spending time together. Iker has homework, she'll say, appearing suddenly, or he needs to practice piano. The boy is pulled away, looking back over his shoulder with an expression Don Mateo recognizes. It's the same look Sebastian had as a child, when Don Mateo had to leave for a double shift, unable to stay for dinner. That look of wanting more time that circumstances won't allow. One dawn, while gathering glasses in the living room, the parquet floor still smelling of fresh walks, Don Mateo hears a murmur behind the partially open study door. It's Valeria's voice, low but clear. Tomorrow, in front of everyone, have him serve as a waiter. Let him learn his place. Another voice responds nervously, belonging to Valeria's sister, who's visiting from Guadalajara. What if Sebastian gets upset? Valeria laughs without joy. I know how to handle him. Don Mateo stands frozen, the tray trembling in his hands. That phrase, in front of everyone, cuts like ice. He sets the tray down carefully on a side table, afraid his shaking hands will drop it. His reflection wavers in the dark window, ghost-like. Behind him, the house sleeps in its expensive silence. He touches the rosary in his pocket, and for the first time since Rosa died, he wonders if prayer is enough, if faith can survive this kind of slow erosion. In the hallway, Don Chuy, the doorman from his old building, crosses paths with him during a morning visit. The man lowers his eyes, uncomfortable. He's seen too much during his visits to deliver mail, to check on the old apartment. He knows what's happening, but says nothing, afraid of losing his own job, afraid of crossing the boundaries that separate the working poor from the wealthy. Don Mateo doesn't blame him. He understands survival. The rosary in his pocket feels like a heart demanding something, though what exactly he cannot name yet. The day of the reception, the house glows under warm lights. Soft music plays from hidden speakers, something classical that Valeria selected to impress. Glasses clink against each other like small bells. Conversations float through the rooms, peppered with English words and laughter that sounds rehearsed. Valeria, the perfect hostess, moves through the crowd in a black cocktail dress, her smile fixed and brilliant. She gives orders without looking, her voice low but commanding. Mateo, quickly, those plates. When a guest accidentally knocks over a wine glass, red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood, she turns to him. Sir, clean this, please. Heads turn. The conversations stop mid-sentence. Silence falls like a curtain, heavy and suffocating. A woman in pearls looks away, embarrassed. A man clears his throat and studies his shoes. Don Mateo moves forward, his body operating on autopilot, while his mind goes somewhere else, somewhere safer. He kneels beside the table, feeling his joints protest. The wine has already soaked into the fabric, creating a stain that will be permanent. Like some things, like some wounds. But Sebastian arrives earlier than expected. His flight from Monterrey landed ahead of schedule. The business meeting concluded faster than anticipated. He stands in the archway of the living room, still wearing his suit from the plane, his tie loosened. He stops there, briefcase in hand, and sees his father bent over, picking up shards of broken glass with bare hands. He sees, also, the old man touch the medallion around his neck as if searching for air. Don Mateo's blood draws thin lines across his palm, small red trails that drip onto the expensive rug. Sebastian's face changes. The color drains from it, replaced by something hard and cold. He sets his briefcase on the floor carefully, precisely, as if that simple action requires all his concentration. The room holds its breath. At that moment, Iker appears from the hallway, a phone in his small hand. He's been quiet all evening, watching from corners the way observant children do. "Papa," he says, his voice cutting through the silence with the clarity of innocence. "I recorded when Aunt Valeria said grandfather was a burden." He holds up the phone, the screen glowing. "I have it all here." The words land like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread across the room. Valeria's smile freezes, then cracks. Behind Iker, Doña Tomasa steps forward from where she's been standing near the kitchen, having brought over some pan dulce earlier in the day. Don Chuy appears as well, still in his doorman's uniform, having stopped by to drop off mail. They nod silently, their presence a testimony without words. Anna, the housekeeper, emerges from the kitchen, her eyes red and swollen. She's been crying, and now her voice trembles as she speaks. I can also say what I saw. If it helps Don Mateo, I'll tell everything. Her hands twist in her apron, but her gaze is steady. The guests begin to murmur, sensing the shift in atmosphere, understanding they have walked into something private and painful. Some start to collect their coats, others pretend to check their phones. Valeria's sister from Guadalajara has gone pale, recognizing her own voice will be on that recording too. Sebastian takes a breath, deep and deliberate. His jaw tightens. He walks to the center of the room, his shoes clicking against the hardwood floor, and speaks with a voice that's firm but controlled. Everyone, please move to the terrace. It's not a request. The music cuts off mid-note. Someone turns off the speakers. The guests file out quietly, grateful for the excuse to leave, their high heels and dress shoes creating a processional sound. When they're alone, the family and the witnesses who matter, Sebastian turns to Valeria. He doesn't shout. He doesn't raise his voice. Instead, there's a clarity in his expression that's more powerful than anger. Today, there will be no more shame for my father. The words are simple, but they reorganize the air in the room, establishing new rules for how things will be. Valeria tries to speak, her mouth opening and closing, searching for the right combination of words that will smooth this over, that will restore her control. But Sebastian holds up his hand. Not now. Later that night, after the house has emptied and the leftover food sits forgotten on the kitchen counter, Sebastian makes a phone call. The clock on the wall reads 11:30. He dials Licenciado Herrera, a lawyer he's known since law school, someone he trusts. The conversation lasts 40 minutes. They discuss measures, legal protections for elderly abuse, documentation requirements, witness statements. They talk about clear boundaries in the household and the preparation of a formal complaint for mistreatment of a senior citizen. Don Mateo sits at the kitchen table while his son makes this call, watching Sebastian pace across the tile floor. The old man's hands rest on the table's surface, the cuts from the broken glass now cleaned and bandaged. Iker sits beside him, quiet but present, occasionally reaching out to touch his grandfather's arm as if to confirm he's real, that he's still there. When Sebastian hangs up, he sits down across from his father. The kitchen light is harsh and fluorescent, showing every line in both their faces, every year of their respective ages. "Papa," Sebastian says, and his voice breaks slightly on the word. "I should have seen. I should have known." Don Mateo straightens his back, feeling something shift inside him. Not just relief, though that's part of it, something more fundamental. The weight of the air changes, becomes lighter. Things that were scattered and wrong begin to move back into their proper places. The rosary in his pocket seems to settle differently against his chest. No longer an anchor, but a compass pointing toward something he'd almost forgotten. Toward dignity. Toward the possibility that justice might still exist in this world. The next day arrives with frank morning light streaming through open windows. No soft music plays, no champagne chills in ice buckets. Instead, there's a gathering of a different kind. Sebastian has asked certain people to be present. Some family members who live nearby and need to understand what's happened. The neighbors who witnessed the mistreatment. Anna, standing near the wall with her hands clasped. Don Chuy in his press doorman's uniform. Doña Tomasa with her gray hair pulled back, her face set in an expression of determined kindness. "Papa, sit here," Sebastian says, and places a chair at the head of the dining room table. The same table where, just weeks ago, Don Mateo stood serving guests who wouldn't meet his eyes. Now it's being offered to him, as it should have been from the beginning. Don Mateo hesitates, his hand touching the chair's back. It feels wrong somehow, this reversal. But Sebastian's hand on his shoulder is gentle and insistent. The old man sits, his spine straight despite the ache that lives there permanently now. Valeria enters the room wearing sunglasses though they're indoors, her face carefully composed. She's dressed immaculately as always, her clothing armor against whatever is coming. She takes a seat across the table, her sister beside her, both maintaining expressions of controlled innocence. "I don't understand what this is about," Valeria says, her voice smooth as polished stone. Some kind of family meeting? Sebastian doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he sets his phone on the table and connects it to a small speaker. I'm going to show you all something, he says. His finger hovers over the play button. And then people are going to speak, and you're going to listen. The video begins. The phone screen is small, but the audio is clear. Iker's recording, taken from behind a partially open door, captures Valeria's voice with perfect clarity. Tomorrow, in front of everyone, have him serve as a waiter. Let him learn his place. The words sound even crueler played back, stripped of context, raw and ugly. Then her laugh, sharp and dismissive. I know how to handle Sebastian. More footage follows. Valeria telling Anna to serve Don Mateo's food cold. Valeria criticizing the old man's cleaning while he stands 3 feet away, his head bowed. Valeria's voice again, talking to her sister about the assisted living facility in Tlalpan. Just somewhere to put him where he won't be an embarrassment. That word, embarrassment, echoes in the silent room. Don Mateo feels it like a physical blow, even though he's heard it before. Hearing it now, with everyone present, with the evidence irrefutable, makes it real in a way it wasn't before. When the video ends, Sebastian looks around the table. Now, he says, others have things to say. Anna steps forward first. Her voice shakes, but she speaks clearly, looking not at Valeria, but at Sebastian, as if testifying to him alone. I saw her take away his meals if they weren't eaten fast enough. I saw her give him cleaning tasks that would take me, a young woman, 3 hours, and expect him to finish in 1. I saw her threaten to fire me if I helped him. She pauses, swallows. I saw him lose weight. I saw the cuts on his hands from the harsh chemicals. I saw him stumble from exhaustion and catch himself on the wall. Don Chuy speaks next, removing his cap respectfully. I've known Don Mateo for 20 years. When I visit to check on his old apartment, when I see him here, I see a different man, smaller, quieter, like something in him is being erased. His voice roughens with emotion. No elder should be treated this way, not in their son's home, not anywhere. Doña Tomasa, who has known the family since Sebastian was a boy, who brought tamales to Rosa's funeral, speaks with the authority of age and memory. I kept dates, she says, pulling a small notebook from her purse. January 15th, I brought pan de elote. Don Mateo had a bruise on his arm from slipping. On a wet floor he'd been made to clean at night with poor lighting. February 3rd, I saw him carrying grocery bags up the stairs, heavy ones, breathing so hard I thought he might collapse. March 9th, he told me he was fine, but his hands were bleeding from dish detergent and hot water. She closes the notebook. I wrote it down because I hoped I was wrong. I hoped I was seeing things that weren't there. But I wasn't wrong. The truth, spoken aloud by multiple voices, creates something solid and undeniable in the room. It organizes the chaos, puts words to things that were happening in shadows and silences. Valeria tries to speak. These are misunderstandings, taken out of context. I was trying to help him feel useful, to give him purpose. Her voice has lost its smoothness, becoming brittle. You can't possibly believe... I believe them, Sebastian says, cutting her off. His voice isn't loud, but it carries weight. I believe my son who recorded you. I believe the people who had no reason to lie. And I believe my own eyes. I saw my father bleeding. I saw him thin and tired. I saw him on his knees. He stands, placing his hands flat on the table. My father is not a servant. He's not an embarrassment. He's the man who raised me. The man who worked 3 jobs so I could go to university. The man who taught me what dignity means, even though I forgot to protect his. He takes a breath, steady and final. From today forward, you don't speak to him unless it's with respect. And that doesn't matter anymore, because you're leaving this house. Now. The words fall like stones, each one deliberate and irreversible. Valeria's face goes white, then red. Her sister reaches for her arm, but Valeria shakes her off. You can't. I can, Sebastian says, and I am. Valeria stands, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She collects her purse with hands that tremble despite her efforts at composure. When she crosses toward the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood for the last time, the air in the house seems to shift. Something heavy lifts. The windows seem brighter, the rooms seem larger. After the door closes behind her, silence settles again. But this silence is different. It's not thick with unsaid things. It's clean and open, like the silence after a storm passes. Sebastian takes his father's hand. The old man's fingers are rough and scarred, familiar. "Forgive me for not seeing," Sebastian says, his voice barely above a whisper. "Forgive me for being blind." Don Mateo doesn't respond with words. The rosary makes a small sound as it shifts in his pocket. Across the room, the morning light touches Rosa's photograph on the wall, the sepia image catching the sun. The dining room, which had been a stage for humiliation, becomes once again a place where respect can live, where a father can sit at the head of his son's table and know he belongs there. The formal complaint moves through the system with surprising speed. Licenciado Herrera knows the right channels, the right people. Within 3 weeks, there's a hearing. The evidence is substantial. Iker's video recordings, time-stamped and clear. Anna's testimony, given with quiet courage despite her fear of retaliation. Don Chuy and Doña Tomasa providing their observations with the weight of reliable witnesses. Medical records showing Don Mateo's weight loss, the documentation of injuries, the prescription for anxiety medication he'd been too ashamed to fill. The prosecutor assigned to the case is a woman named Jimenez, in her 50s, who handles elder abuse cases with particular intensity. She's seen too many families hide mistreatment behind closed doors in nice neighborhoods. She questions Don Mateo gently but thoroughly, building a timeline of escalating abuse. She photographs his hands, still healing from chemical burns. She notes his trembling when he describes certain incidents, the way his voice gets smaller when talking about the dinner party where he served guests. The judge listens to everything over 2 days of testimony. He's a man near retirement, with grandchildren of his own. When he speaks, his voice is measured but firm. The verdict comes down like rain after drought, necessary and cleansing. Guilty of elder abuse, emotional cruelty, and violation of family obligation. The judge doesn't mince words in his statement. This court finds that the defendant systematically degraded and humiliated a vulnerable senior citizen in what should have been a safe family environment. The sentence is severe and public, a fine substantial enough to hurt, calculated as a percentage of her family's wealth. Mandatory reparation of damages to Don Mateo, financial compensation for medical expenses and emotional suffering. But more than the money, more than the legal record, is the community service requirement. 200 hours of mandatory service at an assisted living facility in Coyoacán, supervised by trained social workers who will report directly to the court. Valeria, who treated an old man as beneath her, will now care for others like him under watchful eyes that won't tolerate any hint of her previous cruelty. Additionally, the prenuptial agreement she signed before marrying Sebastian becomes relevant. A clause states that in cases of abuse or criminal conduct, she forfeits any claim to family assets until all legal obligations are satisfied. The lawyer who drafted that agreement years ago was Licenciado Herrera. He'd insisted on it, knowing families, knowing how power can corrupt. Now it serves its purpose. The news travels through Polanco's social circles like wildfire, at coffee shops in the neighborhood, at gallery openings, at charity events, people whisper. The shame this time doesn't land on Don Mateo. It lands exactly where it belongs. Some of Valeria's friends distance themselves. Others perhaps look at their own households with more awareness, wondering what happens in corners they don't observe. Sebastian reorganizes his home completely. He converts the largest guest room, the one with windows facing the garden, into his father's proper space. New furniture ordered specifically for an older person's needs. A comfortable chair with good back support. A reading lamp with adjustable brightness. Bookshelves at accessible heights. A small refrigerator stocked with drinks and snacks Don Mateo can access whenever he wants. The room smells of fresh paint and new beginnings. A geriatric doctor comes to the house, recommended by Licenciado Herrera's sister, who works in healthcare. Dr. Ramirez examines Don Mateo thoroughly, prescribing supplements for the weight loss, cream for his hands, exercises for his joints. She speaks to him with respect, calling him Señor, asking his opinion, treating him like a person rather than a problem to solve. Meal times become different. Sebastian adjusts his work schedule, making sure he's home for dinner at least 4 times a week. The first shared meal is pozole, the red kind Don Mateo taught Sebastian to make when he was 12 years old. The kitchen fills with the smell of hominy and chili, of oregano and lime. They cook it together, father and son, Sebastian following instructions, Don Mateo guiding but not doing all the work himself. It's a collaboration, a relearning of old patterns. Fresh bread comes from the panaderia, still warm. They eat at the table together, the three of them, Sebastian, Don Mateo, and Iker. The boy asks questions constantly, wanting to know everything about his grandfather's life. Tell me about when you sold tamales. Tell me about when Papa was little. Tell me about the mountains in Oaxaca. Don Mateo tells him, his voice growing stronger with each story. Iker pulls out a notebook, the same one where he recorded those terrible videos, but now he uses it differently. He writes down what his grandfather says, preserving it. "I'm making a book about you, abuelo," he announces proudly. One evening, after the dishes are washed and put away properly, not by Don Mateo, but by all of them together, the old man finds a moment alone with his son. They stand in the living room where the humiliation happened, where he knelt and bled. But it's transformed now by everything that came after. "Son," Don Mateo says, looking at Sebastian directly, "dignity isn't something you ask for, it's something you protect." Sebastian takes his father's hands in his own, careful of the healing skin. "And I'll protect it with you, Papa. Always. I should have done it from the beginning, but I'm doing it now." The rosary, which has been a weight and a comfort, a hiding place and a prayer, returns to its proper place in Don Mateo's pocket. But now it's different. It's no longer a refuge from reality, but a witness to justice served. He feels, for the first time since Rosa died, that his place in the world is secure. Not because he's powerful or wealthy, but because he's valued by those who matter, because his son finally sees him, because love, which had been obscured by blindness and manipulation, has found its way back to the surface. The house that was once a silent prison becomes, gradually and genuinely, a home. Not perfect, still carrying echoes of what happened, but healing in the way families can heal when truth replaces pretense, when justice replaces cruelty, when dignity is restored to those who should never have lost it. The last words Don Mateo speaks that night before sleep, holding his rosary in the darkness of his new room, are simple and true. Dignity is not negotiable. Rosa's photograph sits on his nightstand, and he can almost hear her agreeing, her voice mixing with the night sounds of Mexico City outside his window, the city where he built a life and where his son finally learned to protect it.